creative people don't fit very well into nested boxes. And in order for them to fit, they have to do damage in some sense to their psyches, because they're not naturally made to, that isn't their natural environment, boxes within boxes. And so they might say, well, I'm being oppressed. And it's like, well, of course you're being oppressed. It's like, if you're in 50 boxes, it's going to constrain your freedom of movement, but maybe you should be somewhat grateful for the fact that the boxes exist. You think, well, you don't even notice them. The boxes are so effective that you don't even notice them. You can even criticize them. And you should, because maybe they could be better and not quite as rigid and so forth. And, the criticism is justified, but you have to keep both of the representations in mind at the same time. Your culture is the wise king and the despot at the same time. And people hate that sort of thing because, and our rational minds and our logical, and our history of logical intellectual thinking has forced us to assume that a thing can't be itself and its opposite at the same time. But unfortunately, when you're talking about very large-scale categories, things are what they are and their opposite at the same time. Because culture is the wise king and the tyrant. And that means it's very difficult to adjust your behavior in relationship to it, because you never know if you're talking to the wise king or the tyrant. And you feel that if you do your taxes, or if you have to deal with, say you have to deal with the university bureaucracy in some way. It's like, you're a number, and you're just annoying, like patients in a hospital. Because hospitals would run a lot better if they didn't have any patients in them, obviously. And you feel that, of course, whenever you're in a very complex bureaucracy. It's like, you're exchangeable. And that's very annoying. But by the same token, well, here you are. So you have to criticize. This is also a very complex form of moral behavior. You have to criticize with gratitude. And that's something that students should really be taught in university, because the opposite of gratitude is resentment. And there is nothing that's more pathological than resentment. The only thing that comes close to resentment in terms of its capacity to produce misery is arrogance. And those things are often, it's arrogance, resentment, and deceit. It's like that's the evil triad. You get all those three things going in your life, and boy, you're going to be in rough shape very, very rapidly. I think this is the way the world is structured when you consider it as a place of action. So the world as a place of action has characters, not like the elements are characters, and the characters are engaged in dramatic behavior. So, and there are classes of characters, and as far as I can tell, this is a reasonably comprehensive classification of dramatic characters. And we'll start from the inside and go out. And you can think of any of these as primary, by the way, and you'll see that reflected in different kinds of mythology. So sometimes the maternal is primary, and sometimes the culture is primary, and sometimes the hero, the individual, is primary. And I think that's because these three things are irreducibly primary in that, from the perspective of consciousness, in that to be conscious, there has to be you. But if you're conscious, you have to have evolved within a culture, and that culture is necessarily nested in the natural world. And so wherever there's one, there's all three. And the individual is also the thing. Without the individual, there wouldn't be any separation between nature and culture. And so you can see the individual consciousness as the generator of the entire structure. But you can say that about any of the characters. So there's the archetypal son, because the hero tends to be masculine. And then it has that character has a positive element and a negative element. And the positive element is the good person, and the negative element is the bad person. And that's why you can identify two fundamental characters in the Christian story, so to speak, that play out these roles. And they're seen as eternal adversaries locked in battle across time. And that would be, the battle takes place in the natural world, the battle takes place in the cultural world, and the battle takes place within as well. So, and you can see that reflected in stories all the time, because, it's so frequently the case that, the hero, the superhero, has his nemesis, right? And it's the guy that he's extraordinarily well matched with, who continually tests his wits and whose motivation is essentially destructive. And so you see that with Batman and the Joker, for example. Or you see it with Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, or I mean, there's always this pairing, and that's partly because I think there are the archetypal realms of human decision making are something like, are you working to make things better, or are you working to make things worse? Are you possessed by resentment and hatred so that you want things to degenerate and burn, or are you hopeful and capable of manifesting faith in the future so that you're working to make things better? And then there's a battle in everyone, in their own psyches, and then there's a battle in culture. There's a battle everywhere between those two fundamental perspectives. And then the archetypal son is the son of the great father, and the great father represents two things, order and tyranny. So there's the hero and the adversary at the individual level. And at the social level, there's order and tyranny. And so, roughly speaking, that's either the wise king or the despot. And the despot is someone who tries to eat his own sons, which is actually a fairly common mythological trope. And, you know, you're under the thumb of a despot when you're not allowed, really, either to be hero or adversary. You're just a cog in the structure of the social world. So that's despotism. On the orderly side, well, culture is that's what we're sitting in right now. You know, I mean, this is social order that encapsulates us. Everything about it is social order. I mean, there are rows. They're roughly linear. You know, everyone's in their place. Everyone knows exactly what to do. We're unbelievably well protected from virtually anything you could possibly imagine. And so, you know, we're in our father's living room, so to speak. And in that living room, it's a safe space. Oh God, I should never have said that. Anyways, it's a well-protected space in which people are able to play and explore. And it seems to me that one of the functions that fathers play in a family, if they're fulfilling their function properly, is that what they do is put a perimeter around the territory so that inside the walls, so to speak, it's safe, and inside the safe walls, the children can play and explore. And in their playing and exploring, they develop their own individuality. And so, you know, you keep the darkness at bay, and you can certainly see that that's what children want, because as soon as you put them in a dark room, the first thing they say is, you know, come chase the monsters away out from underneath the bed. And you know they wouldn't be thinking that if they hadn't had an extraordinarily long evolutionary history of being chased by monsters in the dark. So, and there are monsters in the dark, and everyone knows that, which is why you tell your children not to go play at night after it's dark, even now. So order and tyranny are the representations of culture. And the thing is that there's a constant interplay between those two, because you can never tell exactly when order has gone too far and become tyranny. So, and you can never tell really when there's so little order that, well, the next thing happens, which is the emergence of chaos. And chaos is the great mother, and it's creative and destructive. And that's nature itself. And so, and then on the outside, the very outside, and this is the most complicated category of all, is that it's the dragon of chaos. And it represents something that's very difficult to conceptualize, but it's the unconfigured substructure of being that gives rise to these other categories. So Donald Rumsfeld at one point made a very famous comment. It became famous because it fits an archetypal structure. He said there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns. Okay, the dragon of chaos is the unknown unknown. It's so unknown that you don't even know it's there, but it can raise its head at any given point. It's the thing that leaps out of you in the darkness.